tonight on First at 9, this Thursday, the 20th of June 2024. Neighbourhood First. India's External Affairs Minister Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar arrives in Sri Lanka for his first visit to a foreign country since reappointment. Confirms India's continuous support to Sri Lanka. Counter inflation. Individual income must grow to face inflation as the country overcomes the economic crisis, says the central bank governor.
If we take a position that because of the crisis we should not increase salaries of incomes in people, we will never come out of this crisis.
Empowerment. Parliament passes the Women Empowerment Bill with amendments. Restructure. Ceylon Petroleum Corporation's Refinery is to be restructured as an independent corporation under the government's SOE restructuring program. Investment. Government to sign more MOUs with the Middle East to bring in foreign direct investment to the country.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දෙනු සෙන්සොඩයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
This is Ada Derana First at 9 with Indivadi Amuata. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
And a very warm welcome. You're joining us tonight, this Thursday on First at 9 for the very latest from across Sri Lanka and indeed from around the world. We start off with the top story making headlines tonight. Marking the first diplomatic exchange between India and Sri Lanka following the inauguration of the new Narendra Modi-led government, Indian Minister for External Affairs Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar reaffirmed his country's support for Sri Lanka under the Neighbourhood First policy. As part of Dr. Jaishankar's visit to Colombo, which is mainly to revive and review the progress of ongoing development projects between the two nations, several projects funded by the Indian government were inaugurated, including the Maritime Rescue Coordination Centre. According to the President's office, the inauguration of the Maritime Rescue Coordination Centre underscores the deepening maritime security cooperation between India and Sri Lanka.
Marking his first visit after being reappointed as a minister by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi following the Lok Sabha elections, Indian Minister of External Affairs Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar arrived in Sri Lanka this morning. Upon his arrival at the Bandaranaike International Airport, he was welcomed by State Minister of Foreign Affairs Tharaka Balasuriya and the Governor of Eastern Province Senthil Tondaman. The visiting Indian Foreign Minister called on President Ranil Wickremesinghe at the President's house in Colombo this morning. Bilateral discussions between President Wickremesinghe and Dr. Jaishankar focused on the progress of ongoing development projects between the two nations. During the meeting, President Wickremesinghe and Minister Jaishankar jointly unveiled a digital plaque commemorating the inauguration of 106 houses constructed under the Indian Housing Project in Kandy, Nuwara and Matale districts. Additionally, they handed over 24 houses in model villages in Colombo and Trincomalee to their respective beneficiaries. Further, the Maritime Rescue Coordination Centre, comprising a main centre at the Colombo Naval Headquarters, a sub-centre in Hambantota and unmanned installations in strategic locations across Sri Lanka's coastline, was virtually commissioned by the President and the Indian External Affairs Minister. The President's office stated that this initiative underscores the deepening maritime security cooperation between India and Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, this afternoon, Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar called on Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena at the Temple Trees. During the meeting, the Indian External Affairs Minister reaffirmed India's support for Sri Lanka under its Neighbourhood First policy. Discussions between the two parties held on Indian investments, development projects, connectivity projects, and other mutually beneficial cooperation in different spheres. Later in the day, the Indian Minister of External Affairs met with his Sri Lankan counterpart President's Council Ali Sabri at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The bilateral discussions between the two ministers centered on a range of issues of mutual interest, including economic and development cooperation in regional and multilateral fora and cooperation between the foreign ministries of the two countries. The Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar also met with opposition leader Sajith Premadasa. During the discussions, the opposition leader assured that the Samagi Jana Balawegaya will continue to foster relationships with India if they form a government in the future. The Indian External Affairs Minister reiterated India's commitment to maintaining close ties with Sri Lanka and expressed his eagerness to further develop this enduring friendship.
Less sugar, same great taste. From Melbourne.
The governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka made some comments earlier today, but we go to Parliament, where the Women's Empowerment Bill was passed in Parliament today with amendments. The bill proposes essential provisions to legally empower women, including the establishment of a dedicated commission for the implementation. State Minister of Higher Education, Dr. Suren Raghavan, is of the view that the bill should contain a clause that focuses on providing relief to the women who became widows or disabled due to the armed conflict and also their children. Meanwhile, Parliament debated on the proposed imputed rental income tax.
The imputed rental income tax led to a massive controversy. When implementing the tax policy, the President clearly said that he would present the relevant financial information. This requires technical assistance reports. He said that those reports would be tabled in Parliament. However, it has yet to be presented to this House. The President said the agreement with the IMF cannot be changed. However, Senior Mission Chief Peter Brewer said the agreement can be changed based on the prevailing situation.
වෙලාවට අවස්ථාවන් වලට අනුරූපීව IMF agreement එක සංශෝධනය කරන්න පුළුවන් කියලා. දැන් මම සභානායකතුමාගෙන් පොඩි පැහැදිලි කිරීමක් කරගන්න හදන්නේ දැන්.
As per the statement by the Ministry of Finance, the imputed rental income tax will be increased by 0.4%. The estimated target is to collect a revenue of 100 billion rupees. If a tax of 100,000 rupees is levied on a single house, then at least 1 million houses will have to be subjected to the tax. The President told this House that the first residence of a person will be exempt. However, that is not clearly mentioned in the statement issued by the Ministry of Finance. Are there determinants with regard to the imposition of this tax? This tax is being imposed because the government was unable to introduce the Act on the Recovery of Stolen Assets and Wealth Tax. Please explain to Parliament how this tax will be imposed.
If the government is going to introduce a new tax, it has to be included as a proposal in the budget. If it is a separate proposal, it has to be presented to the Parliament to obtain the relevant approval. This tax in question has not reached that stage yet. A request was made to present the technical information. We will inform the Ministry of Finance to provide them to all of you.
I know that when you have court verdicts, the court verdicts are not always perfect. We know that. Neither is parliamentary decisions perfect. We know that as well. But parliamentary decisions, there's a way of correcting it. Just because there is an issue in the country and an Aragalaya, some people mobilize people around parliament and thought that they can burn parliament and that's a solution. That's nonsense. We may not be suitable in some of the things we do. And as has been referred in the House today, some of the people sitting here may not be suitable. And I agree with that. But then that has to be corrected using the democratic process in correcting it, not burning parliament. Similarly, denigrating the judicial system, the Supreme Court, putting them down, trying to stamp them out, that's not possible. That's wrong. We may not agree with every judgment. That's a separate issue and that needs to be looked in. We have been sworn in to uphold the Constitution. That's a role that we actually have. And then it goes without saying that when pre-enactment review of the bills is given, it goes to the Supreme Court. They review it to look at constitutionally whether it's in line or not and the constitutional interpretation of it. Therefore, any perceived genuine difficulty or issue in the determination, right, of accuracy necessarily must be undertaken through the appropriate reference to the court, not through a select committee of parliament. And the President wants to bring it to a select committee in parliament. You should go through the legal process. Use the system that is there. Such a step would be contrary to the due respect of the judicial independence. And this is what a responsible legislature should avoid. So it is so very, very unfortunate that the President actually came and said such a thing here in the House.
This bill argues for empowering women. This argues for bringing more recognition. It argues for giving them the due place, which is overdue. Therefore, the first Tamil governor to represent the North, I want to reiterate that in the North and East, we have 16,000 war widows and war victim disabled women. ඒ අය ආබාධිත වුණේ, ඒ අය වැන්දඹ වුණේ, ඒ අයගේ වරදක් නිසා නෙවෙයි, මතවාදී යුද්ධයකට අපි ගිහින් එය දරුණු ආයුධ යුද්ධයකට ගිය නිසා. අපි කල යුත්තයි මෙන්න මේ පනත යටතේ අපි ගේන්න ඕනේ යුද ආබාධිත වැන්දඹුවන් සහ යුද ආබාධිත කාන්තාවන්ට ඔවුන්ගේ දරුවන්ට කරන සහනය පිළිබඳව අපි වගන්තියක් මේකට ඇතුල් කළ යුතුයි කියලා මම යෝජනා කරනවා.
Crunchy goodness for hunger on the go.
President Ranil Wickremesinghe reaffirmed that the government is committed to creating a better nation for the country's youth. The head of state made these comments during the launch of the Presidential Scholarship Program at the Temple Trees. The program will provide a total of 106,000 scholarships at an expense of 4 billion rupees from the President's Fund.
The launch of the Presidential Scholarships Program was held at the Temple Trees yesterday under the patronage of President Ranil Wickremesinghe. During the ceremony, scholarships were awarded to 5,108 students as a symbolic gesture. The program will provide scholarships to 6,000 advanced level students and 100,000 students from grade 1 to grade 11.
2021, 2022 and 2023 was a difficult time for all of us. After taking over as the President, I have made a commitment to ensure that no child in this country has to endure those hardships again. We are working towards bringing the country out of bankruptcy in 2024 in order to provide you with a better nation. First, we turned our attention towards people's income. Many lost their sources of income during the past few years. As a part of our response, we have provided assistance to 2.4 million families through the Aswasuma program. Then we focused on land and property ownership rights. There are people who have built houses on state-owned lands, people who are farming on state-owned lands, and people who are living in state-owned urban apartments. We have granted legal ownership of those lands and properties to those people. Now our focus is on the country's education system. Today we have provided you scholarships as a part of our national education policy. We have provided the people with sources of income, land and property ownership rights, and now education. It is up to you to reap the benefits of this scholarship program. You must advance your education through these scholarships. You will conclude your education in the next 5 to 10 years. By that time, we will create a better country for you.
Now, the Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, says that the salaries of individuals must be increased when overcoming an economic crisis in order to support the market for the growth of the economy. Earlier today, I joined Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe at Hyde Park for a conversation on the Sri Lankan economy, and his comments came on the allegations regarding the proposed salary hike. The central bank governor said that the government is unable to increase salaries of the public sector due to the lower tax revenue, and in order to grant salary hikes, the tax rates must be increased in order to improve revenue. Talking about independence of the central bank, I think we cannot avoid discussing the salary hike, which has taken centre stage even in Parliament. On several occasions, the International Monetary Fund mentioned, even at this last review, the importance of independence of central bank.
In our responsibilities, have been able to clearly deliver what we are supposed to do with this independent central bank. Going forward, I think that as a result, I think now there are some, in my understanding, there is a broader public support for independence. And that's why even if you look at some statement made in the Parliament, it's just clearly recognized central bank should be independent. There was a controversy because of the salary hike. I think to me, those are two different things. Salary issue of the central bank staff is an internal matter. That is, as the head of central bank governing board, our moral responsibility, there are twofold. One is our moral responsibility for the country is there in terms of policies, as I said, but as the head of the institution, as a board of the central bank, we have moral responsibility for our staff, to look after our staff and address their concerns, grievances, and support the staff, those who have been working very hardly, and they have made a lot of contributions to recover the economy. So those are two different things.
They are also questioning the ethical right of the top financial regulator of the country to enable salary hike to the staff of the central bank when government has failed to give salary hikes to public servants by at least 20,000.
When you come out of economic crisis, only way to recover from the crisis is to make income of people higher so that they will be able to face high inflation. This is one of the reasons why the social safety benefit and the public sector salaries also increased to a certain extent, but it's not the first step. I think a lot of private institutions, a lot of system enterprises, to a certain extent they have been able to, and that's a good thing that they have been increasing, at least adjusting gradually the compensation salaries of the employees to the extent possible. But why the government has not been able to raise that much of compensate fully for inflation is mainly because government is an institution that rely on the tax revenues. Even public salaries should be increased more because they can't afford to increase right now because of the not sufficient tax revenues. But in our case, it's a collective agreements once in 3 years, then only we fix for 3 years. But government can increase gradually based on their revenue collection. If we take a position that because of the crisis we should not increase salaries of incomes and people, we will never come out of this crisis. So in my position is that central bank would not depend on directly on a consolidated fund or the direct taxpayers fund. We are contributing to taxpayers in terms of paying dividends to the government. So to the extent given by the law that we have given independence and also given the circumstances, if we are able to support our staff to a certain extent based on the earlier practices without violating what has been doing, I think we should be able to do every other institution. If that is possible, I think that should be done in my view.
The Ceylon Petroleum Corporation's refinery is slated to be restructured as an independent corporation as part of the government's state-owned enterprise restructuring program. Speaking before the Committee on Public Enterprises, Secretary to the Ministry of Power and Energy Sulakshana Jayawardena revealed that the restructuring process has received preliminary approval from the Cabinet of Ministers.
Under the SOE restructuring program, we were granted initial cabinet approval to restructure our refinery as a separate state-owned enterprise. The refinery needs development. Its products must be sold at more competitive prices and its efficiency has to be increased. In order to achieve these goals, the refinery must be developed as a separate company.
Currently, about 50% of the corporation's profits are earned through the refinery. However, it has restricted us in the number of brands of crude oil we can import. Currently, we are limited to importing 5 to 6 brands of crude oil, and those are the most expensive in the market. When the refinery becomes a separate corporation, it will be able to raise funds independently. This will fulfill another necessity. The government's policy is to provide a competitive market to all the players in the Sri Lankan petroleum market. Once the refinery becomes an independent company, it will become another one of our suppliers. We will have to buy their products under a buyback agreement. That will enable us to remove the refining margin from our pricing formula. Our competitors have highlighted that the refining margin in our pricing formula is an instance of unfair treatment towards them. When the refinery becomes an independent company and becomes another one of our suppliers, the prices of the refinery's products will become more competitive. The truth is, at the moment, it is cheaper for us to import certain refined petroleum products rather than procure them from the refinery.
The Cabinet of Ministers approved the signing of a Memorandum of Understanding with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for cooperation in promoting direct investment to the country. Meanwhile, in a separate decision, it was decided to sign a proposed agreement on maritime transport cooperation among member states of BIMSTEC. With that, let's take a look at other cabinet decisions taken this week.
The Cabinet of Ministers approved the signing of a proposed agreement on maritime transport cooperation among the member states of BIMSTEC, which was submitted as a proposal by the Minister of Ports, Shipping and Aviation. The agreement is set to be signed after the consideration of the recommendations of an official committee report on the agreement presented by the President. With the aim of attracting direct investment into the country and improving the investment environment through policy and legal reforms, the Minister of Foreign Affairs signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for cooperation in promoting direct investment. The Cabinet of Ministers took into consideration the information presented by the President regarding the signing of the MOU on the sidelines of the special meeting of the World Economic Forum held in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia on the 28th and 29th of April. Meanwhile, the Cabinet approved a combined proposal put forward by the Minister of Mass Media and the Minister of Tourism to conduct the Colombo International Film Festival under the initiative of the National Film Corporation and the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority. The festival is set to be conducted in Colombo from the 8th to the 14th of July this year, with the primary objective of popularizing global cinematography in the country by creating a revival in the Sri Lankan film industry, as well as making Sri Lanka a tourist hub in South Asia by gaining high tourist attraction. As per plans of the Sri Lanka Ports Authority related to the metalling and tarring of the Jaya Container Terminal V-Yard in the Port of Colombo, the Minister of Ports, Shipping and Aviation submitted a proposal to select a suitable institution by inviting national competitive bids. The Cabinet of Ministers approved the respective proposal, which also requests the appointment of a Cabinet-appointed procurement committee and a technical evaluation committee for the process. In the meantime, the Cabinet of Ministers granted approval to allocate funds for the completion of 45,117 housing units under the Samata Sevana housing program of the National Housing Development Authority. Also, the Cabinet of Ministers granted approval to the resolution furnished by the Minister of Public Security to procure 2.3 million pre-printed polycarbonate cards as a reorder from Just-in-Time Technologies Private Limited, required by the Department of Registration of Persons for printing identity cards. The procurement of 5 million pre-printed polycarbonate cards was previously rejected by the Cabinet during its meeting on the 6th of June, while approval was granted during the same meeting to obtain only the essential quantity of pre-printed polycarbonate from the previous supplier until an appropriate supplier is selected, followed by implementation of a new procurement. Finally, the Cabinet approved a decision to implement a pledge loan scheme through banks subject to a concessionary loan rate in order to purchase paddy for the Maha season of 2023 to 2024 and Gala season of 2024. Accordingly, discussions were held with the relevant ministries, departments as well as state and private bank representatives headed by a Deputy Secretary to the Treasury in regard to the method of implementation of the pledge loan scheme. In accordance with the agreement entered into during the discussion, the Cabinet of Ministers granted approval to the proposal submitted by the President to issue pledge loans of 600 million rupees across participatory banking institutions subject to a concessionary loan rate for minor and medium-scale owners of paddy mills during the Yala season of 2024.
Welcome back. We take you to the Colombo Stock Exchange. Shares closed higher, aided by gains in consumer discretionary and material stocks. The SPI climbed 0.19% to settle at 12,249. Harish Chandra Mills and Hunters and Company were the top gainers on the index, up 0.2% and 0.03%. Meanwhile, the S&P SL20 index climbed 0.15% and turnover fell to 2.07 billion rupees during today's session. The capital goods sector was the top contributor to turnover, while the food, beverage and tobacco sector were the second highest. Foreign investors were net buyers, purchasing stocks worth 663.2 million rupees. And that wraps up tonight's edition of First at 9. We'll see you again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.